This video will be a bit different from our usual content. We'll be diving deeper into Buddhist philosophy, which might be a bit harder to grasp if this is your first time encountering these concepts. But trust me, this is the foundation for truly understanding and applying Buddhist wisdom in daily life. If you listen once and don't fully understand, don't worry, just repeat the process. And if it still feels too complex, don't be concerned. We have plenty of other videos that are more visual, accessible, and engaging to help you grasp and apply these teachings immediately to improve your life. I won't take up any more of your time. Welcome to Mindful Healing. Today, we embark on a journey to explore the timeless wisdom of the Buddha on suffering and inner peace. These teachings are not just philosophical ideas. They are a roadmap, a guide to understanding why suffering exists, and, more importantly, how to overcome it. But here's the real question. If suffering is an inevitable part of life, does that mean we are doomed to live in misery forever? The answer is no. The Buddha didn't just identify the problem, he provided a clear path to liberation. In this video, we will break down the Four Noble Truths, Buddha's revolutionary framework for understanding and transcending suffering. Together, we will explore why suffering is universal but not unavoidable, the hidden causes of suffering that we unknowingly feed every day, how to let go of attachment to attain unshakable peace, the practical steps of the Noble Eightfold Path that can transform how you experience life. And this isn't just theory. We will dive into real-life stories of people who have applied these teachings to break free from suffering and achieve deep, lasting happiness. So if you're ready to shift your perspective on pain, embrace life with clarity, and walk the path to true peace, stay until the end of this video. What you're about to learn could change your life forever. The Buddha, originally known as Siddhartha Gautama, abandoned a life of luxury in search of answers to life's inevitable suffering. But why does his story still hold such deep relevance for us today? Because his teachings on suffering remain as powerful and transformative as ever, guiding us through life's challenges, from emotional pain and personal loss to the relentless stress of our fast-paced modern world. After 6 years of extreme asceticism, Siddhartha realized that true enlightenment did not come from self-mortification or worldly indulgence. Instead, it lay within the mind itself. Recognizing this, he abandoned extreme practices and chose a path of mindful meditation under the Bodhi tree. It was there that he attained supreme enlightenment, becoming the Buddha, the awakened one. For the next 45 years, the Buddha traveled across northeastern India, sharing the path to liberation, Dharma, that he had directly realized. At the heart of his teachings was Dukkha, the reality of suffering, and its complete cessation, known as nirvana. The core principles of his wisdom are encapsulated in the three marks of existence: anicca, impermanence. Everything in life is constantly changing. We've made a dedicated video on this topic. Check the link in the description. Dukkha, suffering. Life is inherently marked by suffering and dissatisfaction. Anatta, non-self. The self is ever-changing. There is no permanent, unchanging I. Upon attaining enlightenment, the Buddha traveled to the deer park in Sarnath, near present-day Varanasi, to reunite with 5 ascetics who had once practiced alongside him. There, he delivered his first discourse, known as the Four Noble Truths, a revolutionary framework for understanding and overcoming suffering. This teaching forms the very foundation of Buddhism, offering a clear path to recognizing suffering as a natural part of existence, understanding its root causes, and discovering the way to transcend it. Today, we will focus on Dukkha, the second of the 3 marks of existence, to deeply explore the nature of suffering that we all experience. More importantly, we will examine how to apply the Four Noble Truths in modern life to free ourselves from suffering. 1. The first noble truth, Dukkha, the reality of suffering. The first noble truth teaches that suffering is an inherent part of life. But suffering, according to the Buddha, is not just about physical pain. It also includes subtle forms of dissatisfaction, worry, frustration, and emotional distress. He identified several key forms of suffering. Birth, aging, illness, and death are all forms of suffering. Separation from loved ones brings pain. Encountering what we dislike is suffering. Failing to obtain what we desire leads to frustration. At first glance, this teaching may seem pessimistic. However, recognizing suffering is not about dwelling in negativity. It is about seeing reality clearly and understanding how to rise above it. A profound example of suffering can be seen in childbirth. While birth is often celebrated as a joyous event, both the mother and child undergo intense physical pain in the process. The Buddha also acknowledged more subtle, everyday forms of suffering: overworking, disappointment in relationships, frustration, emotional wounds, self-doubt, depression, and persistent feelings of inadequacy. Understanding dukkha is the first step toward true freedom. By seeing suffering for what it is, we can begin the journey toward a more peaceful, liberated life. We are always in pursuit of happiness, often overlooking the reality that life is a blend of joy and suffering. The Buddha encourages us to acknowledge this truth so that when we encounter hardship, we are not taken aback or internalize it as a personal failing. Instead of accepting this fundamental reality, we often turn to alcohol and other substances to numb the pain of loss, or resort to cosmetics and treatments to reverse and minimize the effects of aging. Because suffering is uncomfortable, we may suppress or downplay it in our lives. We blame others and ourselves, thinking we've chosen the wrong career or the wrong partner. We also live in a culture that tends to ignore everyday suffering such as poverty, illness, work-related stress, aging, and death, while the media continuously presents us with promises that we can avoid suffering by looking younger, upgrading our internet connection, drinking beer, taking pills, losing weight, and so on. When we begin to acknowledge that suffering is a natural part of existence, we can find peace during challenging times, knowing that with time, this suffering will transform into happiness once again. 2. The truth of the origin of suffering, Samudaya, the cause of suffering. Suffering does not arise naturally, it stems from deep-seated causes within individuals. The Buddha taught that the primary cause of suffering is craving, tanha, the desire and attachment to impermanent things. The three main toxins that lead to our suffering are greed, lobha, excessive desire, never feeling satisfied; hatred, dosa, anger, resentment, refusal to accept reality; delusion, moha, ignorance, lack of understanding about the nature of life and oneself. In Buddhism, these three toxins are depicted at the center of the Bhava Chakra, also known as the Wheel of Samsara, a visual representation of the sufferings of the cycle of birth and death. Greed is symbolized by a rooster, hatred by a snake, and delusion by a pig. Importantly, they feed off each other. Each animal bites the tail of the other, forming a vicious cycle of interdependence. This vicious cycle of the three toxins is something we experience daily, both externally and internally. For example, the desire to earn more money and acquire material possessions leads to greed, which manifests as hatred and anger toward anything that prevents us from obtaining those luxuries. A person might go to great lengths to achieve these desires, ignoring everything else. The combination of greed, hatred, and delusion in this case leads to a vicious cycle. The craving for attention, greed, leads to anger when it's not achieved, hatred, all stemming from a lack of understanding of true self-worth, delusion. This not only harms the individual, but also negatively impacts the surrounding online community. The three poisons are countered by three wholesome or positive attitudes essential for liberating oneself from this painful cycle of rebirth and attaining nirvana. These are generosity, loving kindness, and wisdom. All Buddhist practices are directed toward cultivating these virtues and reducing or eliminating the poisons. 3. The truth of cessation, nirodha, the end of suffering according to the Buddha. The noble truth of the cessation of suffering is this: it is the complete cessation of that very craving, giving it up, renouncing it, emancipating oneself from it, detaching oneself from it. Suffering can end when we let go of craving and attachment. When no longer bound by desires and illusions, absolute peace arises, free from suffering, free from afflictions. Eliminating suffering at its root means eradicating all desires, ill will, and ignorance. Therefore, the third noble truth, nirodha, refers to the cessation of craving, letting go of mental desires to end suffering. This profound truth shifts the Buddha's teachings from analysis to an invitation for self-transformation. To stop craving, we must understand what we are truly craving and recognize that if nothing is truly permanent, then it can never truly satisfy us. The end of suffering begins when we relinquish desires, realizing that what we yearn for is often mere illusion, not a reflection of true reality. While the idea of letting go of desires may seem simple, actually practicing and releasing them is a great challenge. Consider the case of an alcoholic. Even though they know drinking is harmful and that they should quit, they continue to drink and struggle with addiction. The Buddha teaches that ending craving is possible, similar to how a therapist or a support group encourages an alcoholic by first making them realize that quitting is achievable. This requires an individual to develop a state of mindfulness, to recognize and understand the nature of their suffering, realizing that their craving for alcohol only intensifies their pain. By observing their actions and emotions, questioning the underlying reasons behind their feelings, they can gain deeper insight into the root causes of their suffering. Most importantly, this process helps to understand the relationship between craving and suffering. For example, when a person loses a possession or their car is damaged, they experience dukkha, suffering. But what if they reflect on their emotions by asking themselves, why am I suffering because of this? What makes me so attached to this object? Why do I feel this way? Why is this situation causing me pain? Such thought-provoking questions help individuals recognize how the mind creates cravings and attachments, allowing them to gradually let go of such emotions and desires. This process can start with small steps, such as not letting oneself fall into sadness when losing an object or failing to achieve a goal. Instead, one can cultivate an attitude of calmness and serenity, regardless of the outcome. By attaining such understanding and awareness, a person can ultimately release their cravings and desires, leading to a more peaceful and liberated life. 4. The truth of the path, Magga, the path to liberation from suffering. The fourth truth is Magga, which means the path, by which the Buddha refers to his middle way in navigating life. The third noble truth discusses the cessation of suffering, while this fourth noble truth addresses the path that leads to the goal of ending suffering. The Buddha taught that there is a path that leads us away from craving and suffering, and he called this path the middle way, the path that leads to nirvana. This middle way lies between indulgence and extreme austerity, striking a balance between excessive self-indulgence and self-deprivation. To practice the middle way, one must free oneself from desires. The Buddha never said that one should not have goals or aspirations. Instead, he taught that we should not be attached to these desires, but rather appreciate the concept of enough and embrace a more balanced and sustainable lifestyle. This path is not a quick fix. It requires a fundamental shift in one's mindset and perception of the world. This path consists of a set of principles and rules that lead to the cessation of suffering. To eradicate suffering, one must follow the Noble Eightfold Path, an eightfold path that helps individuals cultivate wisdom, morality, and meditation. The Noble Eightfold Path consists of right view, seeing life correctly, understanding the Four Noble Truths; right intention, cultivating wholesome thoughts, free from greed, hatred, and delusion; right speech, speaking truthfully, with kindness, avoiding lies and harmful speech; right action, acting ethically, refraining from killing, stealing, and engaging in harmful behavior; right livelihood, earning a living righteously without harming sentient beings; right effort, striving to cultivate virtue, abandon unwholesome actions, and develop goodness; right mindfulness, maintaining awareness, observing oneself and the surrounding world; right concentration, practicing meditation, focusing the mind to attain wisdom and peace. As we come to the end of this deep exploration into Buddha's wisdom on suffering, let's take a moment to reflect. What if suffering isn't something to fear, but something to understand? What if, instead of resisting pain, we learn to embrace it as a teacher? Buddha's teachings remind us that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. It's not life's hardships that cause our deepest wounds, but our attachment to control, our fear of change, and our endless craving for things to be different than they are. The path to freedom isn't about escaping suffering, it's about understanding it so deeply that it no longer has power over you. Now, you have a choice. You can continue living in resistance, letting every setback, every disappointment, and every loss weigh you down. Or, you can choose to apply what you've learned today, to observe suffering without clinging, to let go of unnecessary cravings, and to walk the path of mindfulness, wisdom, and compassion. Remember, right view gives you the clarity to see life as it truly is. Right effort helps you break free from destructive thought patterns. Right mindfulness allows you to experience each moment fully, without fear. Each step on this path is a step toward inner liberation. But this journey isn't meant to be walked alone. I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever faced suffering that, in hindsight, turned into your greatest teacher? Which of Buddha's teachings resonated with you the most today? Let's build a community where we support each other in this journey toward peace and self-discovery. If this video resonated with you, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more deep dive wisdom from mindful healing. Share this video with someone who might be struggling right now. Sometimes all it takes is one shift in perspective to change a life. And remember, true peace isn't found outside, it's cultivated within. So as you step into the rest of your day, I leave you with this thought. Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without Buddha. Stay mindful, stay present, and I'll see you in the next video. Namaste.